Topping Talks.
Let's see it.
105 hours a week, can't be beat. Welcome to Topping Talks. Topping Talks is a Topping Tribune production. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Topping Technologies. Topping Technologies is an IT value-added reseller and services company with a special proficiency in IT security. Heck, I see their founder at least twice a day. Gotta say he's quite handsome and brilliant. He's me, you see, that's the joke. If you're an IT leader or a business owner, you can reach out to the team at sales@toppingtechnologies.com. Also, still giving away a free flamethrower with every IT purchase with Picatinny rail adapters. You can mount it to any standard AR-15, like all office accessories can be. Go to toppingtechnologies.com and click the flamethrower button to learn more and see me shoot a flamethrower. Now, without further ado, today I'm proud to say that I'm interviewing Anthony Snead, who is the Chief Technology Architect Emeritus at Hilti. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So winding back the clock a couple of years, how did you first get into IT?
How did I first get into IT? You know, I go way back in the IT field, way back to the mid-90s. And I got into IT originally as a software developer. So I learned to code in school and then got a job working at Arco in downtown Los Angeles. So I'm originally from Southern California. And stayed there really up until about 15 years ago, and working in starting out with Arco, then going to a software consulting company called Compass Computing in Pasadena. Spent several years there. While I was doing that, I was also writing some articles for various publications, MSDN Magazine, as an example of one of those, doing conferences and the like. And then about 15, actually a little bit more like going on 20 years ago, I actually started a blog. And so about technology topics. So I knew that I was learning something almost every day as a software developer and eventually as an architect. And I wanted to share that information with whoever I could. So if I could find it easily on Google, I didn't really blog about it, but if it was something I had to research or I couldn't do easily from a simple search and I had to actually figure out how to do it, that's something I got in the habit of sharing. And that's pretty much how things evolved over the years.
That's awesome. What was that blog called, and what do you how do you develop it? What's your inspiration? And that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I remember it well because it was the day my first child was born.
Oh, really?
I started the blog. It was this thing, and I blogged about the birth experience. Actually, it wasn't even technology, but after that, I really stuck pretty much to technology topics. So the address is blog.tonysnead.com. And so I own that tonysnead.com domain and have been blogging there. And I think it's up to 2 or 3 million visits or something like that over the years. So it's been popular. It's been useful. A lot of people have gotten things out of it. And so I've really enjoyed that as one vehicle, but really just started as a coder and eventually moved into software architecture and ultimately into chief architecture, which is sort of a leadership role in companies and for my company in particular. But really that evolution of that career along the way, I thought was a great progression. And I like to see people who are in software architecture, systems architecture, solution architecture, those kinds of fields as really doing better if you come from a software development background, because at least in the roles that I had there in the solution architecture side, really a big part of that job was communicating those designs to software architects.
So what kind of development were you doing, and what kind of programs were you working on? And
Yeah, so I've really stuck to the Microsoft platform for most of my career. That's where the money was at the time, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, as you can imagine. But eventually, curiously enough, even though I was a Microsoft guy all those years, I ended up, for hardware-wise, using Macs, essentially.
Really?
Yeah, Macs or Linux, one or the other, just because, just found it much easier as a developer. The tools that I needed and to use, whether it be Git or creating YAML files. So I ended up really just using a code editor, like a lot of developers do, Visual Studio Code, ironically enough from Microsoft, but still really the tool of choice, whether you're doing Angular development on the front end or you're doing Node.js or any kind of language it supports. It's really a fabulous tool. But really built most of my early career on the Microsoft platform, things like SQL Server, of course, C++, going from there into C Sharp, and originally from Southern California. So one of my phases of my career was working for the Walt Disney Company.
No way. What was that like?
It was really interesting. Well, I found it interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, I worked for the studio, and so I was at the studio, really just off the studio lot in Burbank, and we would go have lunch at the commissary. And I actually knew IT people, especially people like database administrators, who were in reality actors, inspiring actors, and they would go off to audition for commercials or whatever roles they were auditioning for, but their day job was IT.
No way. That's
And
awesome.
the reason they loved to work for the Disney company was that in the off chance they might be discovered eating lunch in the commissary.
That's a good idea.
So it was really interesting.
Did your friends get discovered like that, or?
It was interesting. I knew that I never saw anybody, go into the big time, but I do know that they were actively involved in as actors in their careers, and they just happened to. It's like some actors, wait on tables to make a living. Others work in IT. So why not?
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was a good, that was another sort of phase of the career as well.
What kind of projects were you working at Disney, or what was that like, or what was the environment? I've heard so many good things out of the years.
Yeah, so we it was really interesting. I worked for the studio piece and specifically international box office sales. I wrote software to do that.
Oh, really? How?
So we had that's when C Sharp just came into the force. We did that using C Sharp and Visual Studio and those kinds of tools with a relational database on the back end, like Oracle was our database. So I learned how to do Oracle, PL SQL, those kinds of things on the back end. And it's sort of interesting to see how architecture sort of evolved over the years. But in those days, a lot of the business rules were just stored procedures, right? And then you had your middle tier services, and your front end was like a thick client of some kind, like some sort of a GUI that would just run on the desktop. So it was an interesting time, and then from there I actually moved from corporate development into consulting as I was doing before that, and then training developers. So actually, some of the experience I had learning the tools and the technologies, I was anxious to then be able to start sharing with others. So I ended up working for a company called Develop Mentor, and which was like the developer training company of the day. It's no longer in business now, but with the advent of online training and whatnot. But it was all about in-person instructor-led training. So we had an office in LA, we had one in Boston, and we had one in London. And I would just rotate among those offices or go to companies and teach their programmers how to use Microsoft technologies like .NET and C Sharp.
That's awesome. Any fun stories for that, or what was your favorite on-site experience or client?
Yeah, it was. I loved doing it because for me, it was a way to learn technology. It was, I enjoyed teaching it, but the best way for me to learn technology is to teach it to others, and that way, because I have to learn it to such a depth and an extent to be able to communicate and explain that to somebody else and to answer all kinds of questions. So you really had to become kind of an expert in those technologies. Yeah. So I did things, and I also wrote courses.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What kind of courses did you write about?
So I was the specialist in entity framework.
Really? What's that for the folks who are not in IT?
So entity framework, if you're not familiar, is a object relational database or object relational mapper. I know I could get it out. ORM. Technology, and it replaced what was called linked to SQL prior to that, and it became, and it still is today, used by many, many companies to do any kind of database access in code, right? And so use that. So I wrote courses on entity framework, really became an expert in that, and then I actually on the side developed some online tools for it.
Really? That's pretty cool. What kind of online tools?
So I'm also into open source. That's the other kind of piece of my story here, and I developed some things. So I developed a tool that helps you reverse engineer entities, classes from a database. and helps you customize that code generation process. So Entity Framework itself has tools to do what they call scaffolding, which is to build out the code that lets you interact with the database. And a lot of the effort of creating those classes and things like that, if you're starting with the database, you want that code generation to be automatic, and you want it to be something that you can repeat. Well, in the latest iteration of Entity Framework tools, they really dropped the ability to customize that code generation process. So I stepped in and said, okay, I'll do it. I'll create something. And I created a framework based on handlebars.
Really?
Yes. So it's simple. It's a JavaScript framework, and there's .NET support for it. So I wrote a tool that allows you to use handlebars templates to customize the code generation process. That ended up getting picked up by a tool called Entity Framework Power Tools, and that is enormously popular. So there's a little checkbox in there that allows you to customize the code generation. That uses my library. So as a result, I've got quite a few downloads, a couple million downloads of that particular.
Really? That's awesome. Where do they go to download it? That's incredible.
You can go to NuGet.org.
There you go. For the folks out there, check it out.
Yeah, you can check it out. Or if you just use Entity Framework Power Tools, you'll get it for free, essentially. So that's just like one of the things I did. And I developed probably about 70 different libraries over the years. And again, just sort of things that I found useful that I thought, well, I could develop this in a bubble in isolation just for myself, or I could put it into the open source ecosystem and benefit from the feedback and input of others and the contributions. And it was just a marvelous thing. So I'm a huge fan of open source software.
That's awesome. Of all the software you developed for open source, what's the one that you're most proud of?
So the one that I'm most proud of currently, or the one that I think is really useful today for me, is something called event-driven.net. And it's tools and libraries for developing event-driven application architectures. So again, this is something that I've started doing for my work for Hilti, or even prior to that, was really looking at the event-driven architectures, and just found it to be rather cumbersome and to have to create these structures by scratch every time you wanted to do it. So I built some helper libraries to do that. And that also ties into a framework from Microsoft called Dapr, DAPR, which stands for Distributed Application Runtime. And that framework is also open source, and it's also for creating these distributed end-tier, you might call them, or service-based applications, right? And it takes care of a lot of the infrastructure, the things like if you want to get guaranteed message delivery when you're using queues and things of that sort. That's what Dapr exists. And so I wrote an event bus abstraction for Dapr. And so it allows you to use Dapr under the covers, but you're just dealing with an interface saying I have a publish and a subscribe. Right? So you just deal with these interfaces, and underneath the covers, it uses Dapr to do that. So that's something interesting that I did. And what was also interesting about it is I got some input from one of the architects on the Dapr team. Right, one of the guys that wrote the .NET SDK for Dapr, he gave me some input and suggestions, and just a great example of how the ecosystem can really work well.
That's awesome. Then what was the most difficult thing you ever developed for open source?
Yeah, so I think it really it has to do with developing these frameworks, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a different style of application development and architecture using frameworks as it is to authoring frameworks. Mm. And so one of the things that I that I like to chalk up to experience is even something that what I wouldn't consider a success, I would consider it in a way kind of failure, is developing. It's part of this event-driven framework, something that handles, it's called a saga pattern, right? So it's distributed transactions. It's a transaction that's distributed among multiple services, and they all have to participate in this orchestration, right? And so I wrote the framework. I thought it solved the problem, but then I needed to go back and revise a lot of it because from a usability perspective, there were some things that actually came up when people started to actually use it. So it's sort of, it's when your ideas meet reality, right? And you get that kind of constructive feedback that you really learn a lot. So that was one of the great lessons that I learned.
Do you still remember the most important feedback you ever got from the open source community?
One of the things I got that I would put in that category would be pull requests to the Microsoft's frameworks themselves, right? So, because as you may know, that Microsoft's compiler, entity framework itself, ASP.NET, all of those are open source, right? And because they're open source, we all have the ability to contribute to them. And one of the fantastic things about that is when you start to contribute to a library like that, your code gets reviewed by Microsoft employees and developers and architects, just like they would review their own code, right? So you get the same kind of feedback that you would get if you were working for Microsoft, right? And I just thought that was a fabulous kind of thing.
Absolutely, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's So it's and I find just doing things like that just enhances the learning experience and allows you to grow, right, technically, and in working with others, because it's really a team sport, right? And as a developer, sometimes you can kind of get isolated and get blinders on, and the best kind of growth that you can experience, I find, is when you get that interaction with others, which is what I really love also about architecture, which is what I ended up moving into, and how I worked at Hilti was in the field of architecture, which is really a fabulous opportunity because you have a whiteboard, whether that's physical or virtual, and you're charting your ideas, you're drawing diagrams, circles and squares and arrows, but you're interacting, you're getting that reviewed by your peers. Whether those are more junior or more senior than you. And again, you get that opportunity to flesh out those ideas and see which ones are good, which ones are not as good, which ones need improvement. And then again, you get to grow as a result of that.
And what inspired you to choose Hilti? Because I know for the guys who are tool guys, they know that's one of those popular companies on the planet. For the other folks, they might not know they're like the biggest thing in Liechtenstein, which most people can't point to on a map, but I can just because of Hilti.
Absolutely. Hilti's an interesting part of my story as well. I'm actually consider myself some sort of a Europhile, right? So I like to go to Europe. I've lived in Europe for several years. I ended up marrying someone from Europe, from the Slovak Republic. And we lived there for about 7 or 8 years, so I learned the language and I did all of that. Now, while I was living in Europe, I was working for an American firm, Developmentor, and later on, after that, Wintellect is another one, and doing consulting, training. And I would fly to London, teach a class, come back to Slovakia where we were living. And but then when we decided, okay, you know what, we're going to go back to the States again and set some roots out here. We had 2 more children here at that point. Then almost by accident, I ended up working for Hilti, right, which is a European company headquartered in Liechtenstein, and so it's kind of an interesting twist of fate, you might call it, that I ended up working for Hilti.
Absolutely. How do you get that job?
So I actually got it through a friend of mine. We were both working for an oil and gas company in Dallas. I was a consultant. He was an employee. He decided to leave that company. I decided also to move on. And then he got the interview at Hilti, and he said, okay, I'll come to work for you on the condition that you also hire Tony.
No way.
Yeah, so that's how I got in. And that's where I really focused on the architecture part of my career, the software architecture. And it's been a wonderful journey all along the way.
And what was it like going from development to architecture? And do you remember your first project, or was it like drinking from the fire hose? What was that experience like?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question because it's myself, I was in the development field and I loved writing code. It's just a pleasurable experience, and I don't think I would have left that. And in a sense, you never really leave it, but I don't think I would have moved on from development to architecture, on my own without really, beginning to see more and more how wonderful it is to be able to have a say in the overall design of a system. Right, because sometimes as a developer, you're in there and you're performing a task, but you don't necessarily see the big picture. How does your piece fit into the overall system design, right? And what could you do to make that design more maintainable, more extensible, better performant, right? All of those kinds of things, those non-functional requirements. And so the easiest transition for me, and what I recommend to others who want to also follow a similar path, is to become more acquainted with design patterns. Because as a developer, you're familiar with design patterns. You're familiar with singleton, strategy pattern, factory patterns, et cetera, and other kinds of patterns. And then that begins to teach you, first of all, to learn a different language. Right, so I'm going to be speaking now in a language that's a higher level of abstraction, right, than you might do at the code level, and secondly, you're learning to see things in relationship to one another in different parts, and you're learning to do things more efficiently. And, right, so that's kind of what led me to go into architecture, was an emphasis on design patterns, eventually going not only from code patterns but also things like domain-driven design, enterprise design patterns of various kinds. Eventually, as I said, leading to things like event-driven architecture as one sort of paradigm. It's not the only one, but it's a very interesting one, and it also involves not only code but infrastructure. Right? How do you bring in things like a service mesh, into your services? How do you leverage things like Dapper and other kinds of frameworks to be able to provide those kinds of services so that you get, efficient communication between your services, right? How do you prevent your system from becoming tightly coupled, right? And that's going to hurt the extensibility. That's going to hurt performance potentially. And it's almost like an art form, is what I found, right? So it's a matter of balancing things, because everything has pros and cons, right? So there's things, there's advantages and disadvantages. There's trade-offs that you have to make, and where I found myself challenged, and others as well, is sometimes you think of a pattern as something, I have to apply this pattern, right? And you kind of start out doing it religiously. Like, okay, I'm doing this because it's the right thing. I'm supposed to do this, right? And but you don't realize sometimes by doing that, you're making trade-offs. Right? And if you get too black and white and about it, you're going to end up hurting yourself and in a way that you didn't expect, and making the system perhaps less scalable or less performant or less extensible. So you're constantly trading things off, and it's never one size fits all. Right? So you're always looking at the specific use case that you have here and going, okay, what's the pattern that makes sense here, right? And what I found, a lot of teams and the folks that I've worked with as well, is sometimes they think, okay, well, microservices are the way to go, or events are the way to go, so I'm going to use that everywhere. Well, there's a lot of cases and a lot of scenarios where it just doesn't make sense, right? And so when you get that kind of perspective, I think that really that's where you begin to grow more, and you begin to see, well, okay, there's a different way of looking at this.
Absolutely. Do you remember the very first project or one of the very first early milestones that you're especially proud of when you started work there?
Yeah, that's a good one. Actually I do. So one of the cool things that Hilti does is it writes application software for structural engineers. So Hilti has a lot of different businesses. One of them is the tools business. Mm-hmm. Another is what we call fasteners. Right, or anchors, or things that you don't normally see when you look at a building. And Hilti specializes in commercial construction, but things that hold the building together. And usually that's a connection of some kind, either to from steel to concrete, or perhaps concrete to concrete with rebar, and things of that sort. And you need a structural engineer to be able to determine the kind of connections that will satisfy the requirements of the building and the building codes, right? And so the software project is called Profis Engineering. And it's written for structural engineers, and it's extremely popular. I would say it's probably Hilti's flagship, or one of their flagship software products. We have a standard edition and a premium edition. The premium standard is free, but premium you pay money for. And I would say there's quite a few subscribers throughout the world. It's in lots of different countries, so localization is an issue. And the reason I liked that project, and I really got to sunk my teeth into it, is that it really is comprised of a lot of different components that need to do different things. Mm-hmm. So when you look at structural engineering designs themselves, those are written in a language called Fortran. Mm-hmm. Right, Fortran has been around forever, and a lot of people would consider it a dinosaur, but it really was the language that you would use to write programs for structural engineering problems. Right, and so we have this Fortran component written in Fortran. Well, how do we use that? Well, we ended up containerizing it, putting a nice wrapper around it, and so that we could scale it, right? And so when I first came to the company and was working on this project, I was like, okay, we got to scale this. Let's look at containerization. Well, the software wasn't written in a way to be scalable. It had to run on Windows, couldn't run on Linux. It had to run on virtual machines, it couldn't run in a container, right? All of these things, and it was really primitive. So one of the first things, my problems we were launching to a new market. We were launching to North America, and it had to be able to support a massive number of more users, and it couldn't scale. It could only support maybe about a few dozen concurrent users at any one time, right? So my boss said to me, "Okay, we're flying to Ljubljana."
Where's that? That sounds fun.
Ljubljana is the capital of Slovenia. And that's where the team is, the company, the vendor that we used, named Agitavit, that's where they're located. And so they had me fly out there to work with the team, right? And I was fairly new at the time. I hadn't been around that long. And so so I got together with them. We analyzed the problem. We put our heads together. And then but the company that actually wrote the specific piece of software that we needed to scale, they were in the Czech Republic. And they were also an external company. They were not internal Hilti. So I showed up at the offices there. And it turns out that my ability to speak Slovak helped a lot, because this is a Czech company, and Czech and Slovak are almost identical languages, right? So I ended up putting on a bit of a charm offensive, and then I put out the challenge, say, okay, guys, let's take the next couple of days and see if we can't containerize your software, right? And it was like throwing red meat out to the team, and they took it up, and within a couple of days, they had it working, right? And so that was one of the most kind of rewarding experiences I had, and that things like that continued over the years, where we met certain challenges and we had to put our heads together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that was it's fun, and it was great, the international part of it as well, and also also the sort of the tensions that existed between the different companies, and they weren't really cooperating much. So I kind of helped to come in and to say, okay, how can we collaborate? And I think that's a really good transition as well to maybe the topic part of my career, which had to do with chief architecture, right? Because now I'm going not just from someone who's an individual contributor to someone who's really leading teams, leading the architecture practice at Hilti, and also looking at how we're doing things from a strategic perspective, right? And so really that's where the soft skills come in. So all this time, if you're a software developer or an architect, there's a big emphasis on the hard skills, the technical skills, to be able to deliver the value that you need to deliver, but not so much on the soft skills, on the people side. And that's where I found a wonderfully rewarding part of my job as it evolved into chief architecture was the people skills. And that's because at that role in particular, I had to deal with a lot of different stakeholders. So you have the development teams, and that's where the technical background really, shines, but you also have to be able to communicate. But I would sit down with them and say, let's pair a program together, to solve this problem and get to know each other. But then you also had stakeholders on the marketing side or on the management side, right? And so these are business people. They're not technical people, right? So then how do you take these technical concepts and articulate those in a way that can be understood by the business side, right? And that are compelling from that perspective. And that's really the direction I ended up going in recently in the last few years at Hilti.
And any tips to the folks out there who are trying to get that promotion, going from individual contributor to IT leadership position? What was that process like, or what was the biggest thing that biggest skill set or people skills that help you advance that next level?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think people skills is the key word. I think it's learning listening skills, communication, but also winning people over and that really is aspects of leadership, really. And so when you talk about leadership, really we're looking at different styles. Everybody has a different style of leadership. But so in one way, it might be inspiring the team. It might be articulating a vision to say that everyone and getting buy-in from others. And so so one of the most important things that I found there is really something as basic as just showing up. And showing up, not just being physically present, and of course for us, almost all the time that meant Teams calls, virtually. But even in that case, being present, being engaged, and making sure to be presentable, because sometimes you can slack off on that as well. But doing whatever you can to be well prepared and to be engaged, and to draw people into the process. And that just takes practice, and it takes a lot of training just in something which is non-technical at all, but just all leadership skills.
I was going to say, I can't imagine. What's it like leading a team around all the globe? How do you build rapport with them? How do you build that culture? And how do you really all move in one direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Hilti, we had multiple cultures, as you can imagine. So we had the European side, which included the West European, you might say, and let's say the Eastern European counterparts. So we had, of course, Liechtenstein, Germany, Switzerland, and then you had vendors and other teams, let's say in Slovenia, I mentioned, Czech Republic, Poland. Right, so you had those kinds of cultures, and then we have teams in India. So especially over the last few years, we had a big in-housing effort, which involved decreasing the number of vendors we were using, the headcount there, and increasing the internal count. And most of that team got built up in Pune, India. So that was another piece of it. We also had Kuala Lumpur, which is Malaysia. So we had the whole globe pretty much covered in that respect. So from a time zone perspective, that was a challenge. So working for Hilti, I had to learn that early mornings is the rule of thumb. Early morning meetings, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, pretty much every day of the week, needing to be up, needing to be ready for those meetings. So that was a big challenge. And the other one, of course, is not everything that you need to do can get done virtually. Right. So when it comes to the interpersonal piece, especially building that rapport, those relationships, the face-to-face really counts. So I had to also become, be at peace with travel as well. So I got to travel quite frequently, going from one place to the other.
Where was your favorite place to travel that you got to go to for work?
Liechtenstein, you can't beat.
Really? What's it like?
That is amazing. I like to call it the exact opposite of Texas.
Really?
so Texas being entirely flat, pretty much. Liechtenstein is part of the Swiss Alps, and you've got these cathedral mountains going up. These huge cathedral mountains, and there's this valley. So I would say that was really fantastic, and we loved. I loved meeting the people there. Sometimes we would have team outings. And we did everything from Swiss curling. Are you familiar with Swiss curling sport?
No, what's that? I know Canadians. Those funny guys that had little stones in the ice. What do they do? What do they do there?
That's what it is, exactly.
Oh, really?
There's stones on ice, and you're trying to brush the ice in front of the stone as it goes down and to the end and goes to a certain place. So I actually had an opportunity to do that.
How do you do?
That was fun. Yeah, I did pretty good. Yeah. It's harder than it looks.
Oh yeah.
that way. And then there's also up the mountain there are these resorts, for skiing and whatnot and snowboarding. So we got to go up there and just marvelous experiences doing that, which is a lot of fun. And what I liked about our business unit, and I mentioned I don't know if I mentioned this, but our business unit specialized in the anchors, also fire protection. Mm-hmm. But because we sell products related to that, but we would have what I like also about the culture of the company is they invested in getting everybody together. Mm-hmm. So it would cost a lot of money to do this, but when you have 200 people from all over the world and you get them all together for like a week in one place, it's expensive, not only the flights, but the lodging and everything else, and also the activities you did together. But I really had a great time. And one thing that really impressed me, one year we met in Davos.
Really?
Switzerland. Yeah, it was the same place where the Economic Forum takes place, but it was in the off season. So we went there. I think it was in the springtime, in April, and it was great. And one of the things that impressed me was after the day of working together, it was party time at night.
Really?
So, yeah. And so we rented out discos and there was dancing and they do marvelous dinners as well. And so you got that social component there. That was really a lot of fun.
How are the drinks like over there? What was the most popular one? Was it like a team favorite or a staple of the community or like a local brewery, or what was the drinking like over there?
So beer is a big part of things. Yeah, beer and wine, but beer especially in the German parts as well. And in Liechtenstein borders Austria and Switzerland. And so a lot of us would lodge in Austria because it's a little cheaper there, and we would go to the pubs and so I like to call it beer diplomacy, because I would know people in the company and that I really needed their cooperation and help on things. Like one case in particular, it had to do with identity management and security authorization, and I had a lot of asks for him, for this person, and so the best progress I made was beer diplomacy. We met at a pub there, and they have a lot of their local breweries, Austrian beers.
Yeah.
Were really fabulous in there, and you get a glass and it's like literally this tall.
Really?
Yes, and that's like the standard size.
It's like a 2 liter of Pepsi size.
It's almost, I would say it's closer to a liter or half a liter. It could be a liter, but it looks big, but it's very tall, and it's a larger quantity than I would probably consume here.
That's awesome. I was going to say, I'm guessing a lot better quality than kind of just average mass-produced beer in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. It's really great, and unique flavors, and you learn things by doing that. So and then after that, those encounters, it became a lot easier to work with the folks you needed to have good relationships with.
Oh, definitely. And what kind of food was like over there? Or do you have a favorite thing that you get every time, or kind of spice it up every once in a while?
Once again.
What was your favorite food when you were over there?
Oh, food. I have to put this. The headset has a little bit of static, actually, so a little bit of audio qualities on the headset.
Oh, no worries. I was gonna say, Nick, anything you do about that? I mean, jump this up a little bit.
Yeah, let me just see.
Boost it.
See if that's better.
Yeah, a little better.
A little better.
Oh, there you go. I'll just hammer that out later.
Good. So, food's a great thing. Yeah. And that's another marvelous thing about Hilti was they fed us all the time. Mm-hmm. I had many opportunities because from the European culture perspective, that's how you get to know each other, right? Dinner starts maybe about 8 o'clock in the evening, and you go for at least 3 hours.
8 p.m., really?
Yes, 8 p.m., exactly.
What?
Yeah, it's... that's how they do it. And so usually it's like a snack or something. It's not really a dinner. The main meal is midday. Mm-hmm. And so, but in the evening, if you do have a meal in the evening, a full-on meal, it can usually last 2 or 3 hours together. And you have course after course, rounds of beer coming. And that's how, and so you spend that time, together. So meals are a huge part of the cultural experience.
Is it just a bunch of little appetizers, or how do you eat for 2 hours? I can't imagine that.
Yeah, it's one course after the other, usually 6 or 7 courses, exactly.
Really?
In the meal, some of these meals, yeah. You could really, from the appetizers all the way down to the salad, main course, and then dessert. And you just take your time in between. It's an amazing experience. And
such a foreign concept, because Europeans have so much more of a laid-back experience, or laid back. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine having 3 or 4 hours just for dinner. It's like, oh my gosh.
That's right. And it actually kind of touches on a little bit things that I just like to do for personal enjoyment. And one of the interesting experiences I had was a wine tasting club in Milan, Italy.
Really?
Of all things. And so, because one of the interesting things about traveling, of course, if you travel for business, sometimes it's multiple weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And so you get the weekends to do whatever you want to do, right? So sometimes I would go to Milan because it's only an hour or 2 train ride. Could be a couple hours train ride from Liechtenstein to Milan, Italy, because it's in the north. So when I went there once, I stayed at Airbnb. And one of the things that Airbnb advertised was a home cooking experience of Italian food. So I met this family, really, husband and wife. They didn't have any kids at the time. Met them in Milan, and they had a home cooked meal that was this gourmet home cooked meal. It was only about $80 altogether, so it was reasonably priced. It included wine, and so I got to know this business, you might say, this family, and then. Over the years, and then not too long ago, it was like this year in February, I had the opportunity to go again. They had a wine tasting club, and I was able to get together with a bunch of other people. We went through 14 bottles.
Oh, wow.
Of wine, and so that's when I learned you don't drink the wine necessarily. Well, you taste it, and if you drink some, okay. But if I were to drink it, I wouldn't be able to stand after a while. But it was a great experience because these wines were from a specific region of France called Jura. Mm-hmm. Jura. And it's interesting because that's where the word Jurassic come from, believe
Really?
it or not, because there's something about this region in which a lot of these discoveries were made, right, about this period of Earth's history. So, but because of that geological history, the wines produced are very interesting from this region of France. And I had no idea. But the requirement for this club event was that I come with a bottle from this region. And it had to be about $100 bottle.
Oh.
So it was not a cheap experience. But so I had to figure out, how do I buy this in Europe, even though I don't live there? And so I started doing research. I ended up discovering an amazing wine shop in Liechtenstein, not far from Hilti headquarters. And they'd been around for like 100 years.
Really?
Incredible, yes.
That's awesome.
And so they recommended several wines. I bought one for myself. I bought a few more bottles for my hosts, and I ended up taking it on the train with me to this event, and learned a whole bunch of interesting things. I've learned a whole new skill, you might say.
Was it mostly red wine or white? Or what were they like? Or a little bit of everything?
So mostly white. They do have some red wines, but they're not really known for the red wines. They're known more for the Chardonnay with the white wines, and then they have a specific variety of that white wine, which is produced in a specific way that gives it a more yellowish color than normal, and that particular variety of wine, the way it's made and everything. I think there's like a gap in the cask, the wine cask itself, and a layer of yeast on top. And so the way it ferments is more intense, you might say. And that wine is paired with a specific variety of cheese, which is also produced in that region. And the name of the cheese escapes me, unfortunately, but I'll have to find out. But when you pair that particular cheese with that particular wine, it's just an amazing heavenly experience. I can't describe it.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah, so that was another opportunity. I wouldn't have had it if I hadn't ended up working for Hilti. So it's a nice side benefit, you might say.
Were you able to bring any of those wine bottles back to the United States, or no, not so much?
Unfortunately, no. But we did consume them all when we were there. But yeah, there are some that they're probably more expensive now than they were back then. But
of course.
But I had a wonderful opportunity just to become acquainted with a different reality.
That's incredible. And what kind of activities are popular there? You said curling was a big one. What else?
In Europe, yeah. So the winter sports are really popular, of course. Skiing, snowboarding, curling was again a uniquely Swiss experience. And the interesting thing is going in the spring is really cool, and mountain biking.
Oh, really?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, you can actually rent bikes over there, and you can go along trails, and you can also take like a ski lift up to the top and then bike down. So I had a lot of great experiences doing that kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine the views and the pictures. And do you remember your favorite thing you ever saw? Like, do you go, how high are these mountains? I can imagine.
It was cool. So one of the favorite things I saw doing that, and well, first of all, going up this, there was like a trolley car, like a train that would bring you up. And this particular one was like at a 35-degree angle or something. It was relatively steep going up, and you'd make it to the top there. And one of the most beautiful things I remember is just seeing like a hang glider. At that level, just people hang gliding. I'm not sure if they would launch from some of those peaks. They probably did, but that's what you're doing in that area, just kind of hang gliding.
That's incredible. I don't know. I think I'd be too scared to try those hang gliders. I don't know.
Yes, exactly. Better for me to watch than participate, but
right?
Exactly.
Man, I can't imagine those type of fun team building experiences over in Europe. That sounds incredible.
Yeah. So it's really nice. Yeah, exactly. So it's a great company to have worked for, and so many friends there, both here in the U.S. as well as in Europe and in Asia as well. So.
And what's the biggest challenge or biggest obstacle you overcame when you worked there? Really proud of in terms of maybe it's a project or just kind of something that was seemingly was like overcoming the impossible.
I think the more of those interesting events that occurred to me, there was really the opportunity to speak to and present some ideas to the board of directors of the company.
Really? I can't imagine that. That's awesome.
So it's pretty cool, yeah. And Hilti is a private company; it's a family-owned company, so they don't have stakeholders; they have a stakeholder, just one family
Yeah.
owns the whole company. And presenting to the board gave me an opportunity to meet one of the Hilti family members.
Wow. What was it like prepping for that meeting? Did you have butterflies in your stomach? I can't imagine the stress or the excitement for such a unique opportunity.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, exactly. And it was fun. It was interesting because I hadn't presented to the board before, but there were some changes in the team and whatnot. And they said, yeah, we need you to come and talk about what you're doing. What's our strategy? Mm-hmm. So from a technical perspective, really, what I started to do more and more was help the company articulate and lay out a roadmap for their technology investment. Mm-hmm. Right, so the company only has so much money to invest in technology. Mm-hmm. How do you spend it? In what ways can we actually leverage the technology, and what kind of processes can we create, and where do we want to go? What's the future roadmap look like? So this gave me a chance to be able to do that. So the first part of that was what we called a technology competency assessment. So we identified maybe about a dozen or so technology competencies that we wanted to have. And these included things like DevOps capability, observability and monitoring would be another one. Of course, architectural topics like event-driven architecture and microservices, and IoT would be another one. Voice of the customer, how do we get feedback from the customer? Those kinds of things. So after identifying these core competencies, we then said, okay, what are the best practices in the industry? So that involved really going out and doing research. And you can get some information from the likes of Gartner and Forrester, right, which helped quite a bit, but also technical articles, best practices, how do we actually do this, and so once we learn all of these standards, essentially, then we can measure where are we with respect to those standards. Are we in catch-up mode? Are we doing it sort of equally, or are we actually leading the way? And once we identify that, we can see these are the gaps. This is what we have to work on, or maybe we just need to keep doing what we're doing there. And then we formulate a strategy from that, and that kind of lays out where our efforts need to go.
That's awesome. That was over the Liechtenstein headquarters?
Yes, that was in Liechtenstein. Yeah, exactly. Yes, with the leadership of the company. And it was really cool because it was also not just the technology side. It was really the business side and understanding. And what the cool thing about being at a company at Hilti for several years is you get to see the evolution of the company in terms of its technology maturity, right? So in the beginning, because Hilti is a hardware company. Oh, yeah. It's not a technology company. But more and more over those years, technology has become more and more important for the company to achieve its mission. Right. So in the case of, like, for example, process engineering, it's really about serving the needs of our customers, structural engineers. If they use our software, they're more likely to buy our hardware. Mm-hmm. Right. But nowadays, it's even really helping construction to be more productive. Productivity has been one of the greatest challenges for the construction industry in general over the years, right? Because there hasn't been that level of competition in the construction sector as you might see in other sectors. So they really haven't developed as much of a reliance on technology and productivity. So we have an opportunity at Hilti, and one of the parts of our mission and what we're aiming for is really to make construction better, whether that's productivity, whether that's safety. Right, because in some construction projects, it's not unusual to see one fatality for a large construction project. And you're like, well, we got to do better there. Yeah. Another thing is sustainability, carbon footprint. How can we become better global citizens with respect to that, and those kinds of things. So it's cool to be able to do that, and to be able to see, okay, now. In the beginning, when I went to work for them, technology was something sort of an add-on, and now it's becoming more and more core and central to what we're about. And you can see, wow, this is great. We can leverage it. Another good example of that is maybe virtual modeling of a building. Mm-hmm. So before you go in and put in the infrastructure that's needed there and the connections, you can actually model the whole building virtually. Just create a digital twin of that building. And we can have tools that do that. We can have virtual reality headsets. So if you go into a work site and you want to be able to install fire protection material in that work site, you've got, and what that's about basically is you have holes that are put in buildings when you put pipes and electrical through the building. Well, if the holes stay there and there's a fire, the smoke goes through and the burning builds down a lot faster. So we sell a product that seals that. So you have to So you have to apply a product to that hole, and the kind of product you apply is going to differ depending on the parameters that you're faced in that work site. Well, you can use technology, computer vision, to be able to understand what is the nature, what are the parameters of this work site, what are the requirements, and then match that to the specific fire protection product that you need to seal that.
That's incredible, and it blows my mind. It's almost unfathomable how much tools themselves have changed as well throughout the years. And I think I read a couple months ago, or maybe it was a couple years ago, time goes by so quick, some of the devices, like even the handheld drills, are starting to put some IoT in there, so you can do remote monitoring of the fleets that they're leasing out and see and predict like when that tool will break, and kind of point down like, hey, all these tools have that same part of the break, let's make a different part for that. How's that? Were you involved in that process, or what are those like from a tool evolution perspective?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the tools division. I wasn't in that division in the company. I was working on the fastening and fire protection side, but I have also colleagues and chief architects working there, and I'm in a collective group with those chief architects as well, and that's where IoT is really important. So the Internet of Things, and each tool then has a unique address, and then it maintains its own history, its own maintenance history. We know how the tool was used, whether it was properly or improperly, whether scheduled maintenances were performed or not performed, and then we can have notifications to be able to alert the owners of the tool to say, hey, that now it's time to service the tool. It's, this has been the usage history, and now this is what you needed to do to be able to maintain that tool going forward.
I mean, that's absolutely revolutionary in terms of the data collection. I mean, back in the day, it was so much more rudimentary. If something was wrong with your Craftsman tool, you drive over to the Sears and you return it. Yeah. Maybe they put an Excel sheet. Maybe they keep track of it. But if you're collecting all the data in real time, I mean, imagine how much more reliable the products can be, because you know exactly, what's the failure point. And if it's consistently the same, X number of times, that's legit. Like maybe a subcontractor or sub-supplier for that component. I mean, you can just make the tools that much more efficient. Yeah, because there's so much data. To me, that's one of the neatest things.
And it's a great feedback loop, because it can go back into the design of the tool itself, and then the next generation or the evolution of the tool can then use that feedback.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's really, it's a great example though of a traditional brick and mortar, construction company, hardware focused. But what I like about this is that the same excellence that goes into the engineering of the hardware products can be brought over to the software side. Yeah. And that's kind of the interesting challenge. And I know that some of the folks, some of the teams. Or vendors that we use will hire students from a technical university that are structural engineers, and that might know how to write code, but then maybe not all that well, but then make those guys software developers and architects so that they can then build the software to be able to solve those engineering problems. And so that's kind of the cool things. That's where I get to come in and say, okay, from a software engineering perspective, these are the kinds of things you want to think about and start practicing.
And with the software engineering, is that a thing with the fasteners where, depending on where it is in the world and what kind of materials they're using, the software would be able to tell you what size and material fastener they would use to actually hold the building down? Like, how does that computation go? And I can't imagine how much compute power you need to run all those models.
Yeah, it's really great. And we have a thing called advanced baseplate design in process engineering. It's part of the premium product, but it actually will display in different colors the heat map of the force load that comes down from the steel beam onto the steel base plate and onto the concrete foundation beneath it. And that tells the engineer, you can visualize and you can rotate it 3D perspective to see, okay, if I put the anchors in these positions, this is what I'll be able to then support this kind of load, and given the materials and everything else. And it's actually an interesting segue into the AI piece, actually. So as we all know, we're in the big hype curve now with AI, but it also provides some really good use scenarios for this kind of thing, because there's a lot of repetitive manual tasks that the structural engineer is going to need to do to be able to go through that design process, to be able to specify the kinds of anchors that need to be used, where they need to be positioned, how they need to be deployed, and so the system can actually do a lot of that work for the structural engineer. So it makes their job easier, less time consuming, and we call it Smart Anchor. There's got to be a brand, of course, from the marketing folks.
That sounds fancy.
And that's where we got the opportunity to be able to leverage AI to be able to do that, and then eventually looking at things like this whole interaction between the user and the system, and how can we make that more of a natural language model, right, of doing that, and then we can leverage some of the large language models as well. So that's another example.
Cool. That's really neat. And I think you also got into the anchoring adhesives as well. I thought I saw a commercial a couple months ago where, because obviously the anchor, for those not into hardware, looks like a glorified screw, only much more robust.
Yes.
But then I also know depending on what materials you're putting it in, then you also inject some type of liquid that will harden.
Exactly. Those are our chemical anchors.
Yeah. What are those like?
Chemical anchors.
Yeah.
It's amazing the engineering that goes into it, because being able to provide chemical anchoring ensures the strength of that connection in a way that's much better than it would be if you were just taking a standard screw or anchor and using that to fasten those two materials together. So in a lot of use cases, and that's the other interesting thing about that particular product as well. So it's actually grown quite over the years. It started out with just steel to concrete, and then we started loading different modules into it to provide support for different kinds of connections, different kinds of materials. So we start with steel to concrete, then concrete to concrete. Then we have applications like a curtain wall application.
What's that?
So if you have a large office building, curtain wall is the exterior facade of the building. It's how do you actually attach those exteriors to the outside of the building.
So is that like the window attachments or
windows, beams, it's almost like a balcony kind of thing, but no real balcony. But basically, it's how do you attach that exterior?
So it's kind of like a layer around it, like a wrapper.
Exactly, like a wrapper.
Yeah, I know
is
what
the
you're
best
talking
way.
about.
And it's kind of in contrast to other kinds of approaches where the external exoskeleton might be supporting. Usually, you have the internal structure of the building itself, and then the exterior is just a facade, essentially, right? And but you still needs to be connected, right?
But it's not structural. It's not the structural integrity of the building. It's just kind of like dressing on a cake.
Dressing on the cake, exactly. And so that's another example. So what we had to do with process engineering is modularize it, right? So because it was written in the beginning just for one use case, which is the steel to concrete use case, the most common one. But then there are multiple. So now it's got about a dozen different plugins. Really? And we had to change the architecture of the application to support that modularity, right? To be able to load those modules and to have, this is even another important part, have different teams work on those different modules in parallel without stepping on each other.
I can't imagine the complexity of all of that. Is steel to concrete still in terms of volume of things constructed these days, still the most popular methodology?
Yeah, that's the most volume, I think. And but then when you add up all the other ones, you get a lot of use cases there you need to support.
What's the most unique use case, or maybe the newest one that you're seeing more and more of, maybe?
Yeah, so there's things like wood screws, is another one. So
wood screws.
Yeah, that's another one. And
where are those used for? I know. I think of Etsy.com. What's a real world application of that?
Yeah, what's the real world? It's just about anything you can connect. So any kind of material, right? So it's mostly steel, mostly concrete, but sometimes there's other kind of materials. Like this table, for example, is a good one. So here we have screws going through the table that attach the wood to what's underneath it. So that's the kind of thing that Hilti specializes in, and so any kind of connection, we call it structural connections, we want to be able to support. And so there's I was amazed by how many of those things we get, and then also integrations with other programs as well. So other CAD applications that people are using, like Revit, is a CAD, a computer-aided design program that can interact with process engineering. So we can have exports and imports, and you can have API calls.
That's very
that allow
cool.
you to then make this particular product part of the larger ecosystem of what structural engineers are actually using.
That's incredibly neat.
Yeah. So plenty to do during that time.
Absolutely. Well, especially it seems like no matter what's going on in the world, there's always new construction going on somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then the other thing we worked on was something called the Hilti Construction Platform, which is because there is also other kinds of things in the fastening and protection arena that are not part of process engineering, but there are other kind of connections. A good example is what we call mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So I mentioned the fire protection product, but also when you build a building, you want to be able to connect the plumbing, the electrical, and the mechanical pieces of it, those structural connections, and you need to install those in a specific way. Mm-hmm. So we have a program called Modular Support Engineering, MSE, and that application is responsible for these kinds of connections that have to be performed with mechanical, electrical, plumbing, the assembly essentially of those pieces, and so that's an interesting example. We have also our fire protection products that I mentioned before. Well, these are separate applications, but those separate applications, all of these, do a lot of things that are the same. Mm-hmm. So again, as a chief architect, you step out and you go to a higher level perspective, like you're on the top of the Swiss Alps is a good example.
There
right?
you go.
So from a technology perspective, you see the larger landscape and you go, wow, these teams are doing the same thing, duplicative over and over again. Mm-hmm. Is there some way we can kind of fix that so that they can leverage more common features and functions from a centralized library or framework? And we've answered, yes, we can do that, and that's called a Hilti construction platform. So if we want to do something like a bill of sale or a bill of materials, that's something that all the programs have to do. So why do it 3 or 4 different places, slightly different, when you can do it in one place? So that was a lot of our efforts in the recent years, was building out that platform.
Make it a lot more convenient for the end user.
Exactly, yeah, and more efficient for us to be able to build the software so we can then respond to their needs better and provide more of the features that they're asking for.
That's incredibly cool.
Yeah, so it's really cool, yeah, and so. So that's why there's a number of companies and players in this field, but Hilti really, from a technology perspective, especially from a software technology perspective, is also leading the way, which is really great.
And then what do you like to do outside the office?
Yes, so recently I've gotten more into coffee as a hobby, and it's been an interesting challenge for me because I used to order coffee through an online company, right, out in California, and I would order these beans that come in, and then I discovered that I really have to cut down on my caffeine intake, right, to be able to sleep well at night, and so I went to decaf strictly, right. And then it was like a real challenge to try to find beans, but I was able to find a company or a couple of companies online that ship the beans out, single origin beans, and I switched to a method called pour over.
What's that?
Coffee. So that's where you grind the beans, and you put a filter above the cup, and that filter it has the ground beans put in there, and then you pour water into it, and then it drains through the filter below by gravity, and then you have your coffee.
That's pretty cool. Does it taste better, or what's the upside to that methodology?
It's like night and day,
really?
I think, to drip coffee for me.
Only slightly better than my $19 Mr. Coffee?
Yeah, it's way better. And, I've grown to appreciate things like that for the flavor. Mm-hmm. And depending on where that coffee is coming from and how it's been roasted, and prepared, and it's just much more enjoyable, and I can do that without the caffeine, and it was like best of all worlds.
So what's it like searching for all of that? Because I know there's a lot less decaf options out there compared to the traditional coffees.
Yeah, there are. There in most places, yes, but then I found a particular company that only sells decaf.
They exist? Really?
Yeah, it's called decaf.com, actually.
That domain is probably worth more than a Ferrari.
Yes,
that's a good domain.
But it's spelled DEKAF.
Oh, okay. They got the 5-cent domain. Okay, never mind.
That's right. Yeah, they had to change it. Exactly. So that's a little bit of plug for them, but that's been something that's enriched my life a little bit. The other thing is just, mainly just family, traveling. Now that I am retired, I have more time. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I'll do as soon as the government shutdown ends is go to some national parks.
There you go. Got any in mind, or any in particular?
So I've been to Grand Canyon,
Beautiful.
which is fantastic. Really highlight. Love that. Probably want to explore other places and I've been to Rocky Mountain. as well, because that's not far from Texas. So we
There you
can
go.
easily drive to Rocky Mountains and National Park. And so now I want to explore places like Yellowstone National Park,
Grand Teton is another good one over there,
Grand
too.
Teton is a good one.
Yeah.
Bryce Canyon is another
Oh,
one.
yeah. That's
In
beautiful.
Utah. So yeah, we've got a whole list, and that's sort of the next part of the adventure is exploring those.
That's
'Cause I've
awesome.
done my fair share of international travel already.
There you go.
So now it's time to explore the home turf a little bit.
There's a lot of local beauty in the USA. Usually like
Absolutely.
to go with an RV or pop-up tent. What's your favorite way to go see the sights? Or a hotel?
I think we'll probably do Airbnb
Oh, there you go.
or a hotel or something. Yeah, just to go. And I did start racking up travel points knowing that retirement was coming.
I was about to say, how many miles do you have by now going all over the globe?
Yeah, it's quite a bit, and of course it's the whole game there that you have to play with the points and
Oh, yeah.
everything, and so started to accumulate those more aggressively in recent years, knowing that I'm going to need to use them. But, so that should be enjoyable.
There you go. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it, man.
Yes, my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to tune in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Also, don't forget to take time to tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your enemies, tell anyone, everyone. Just stay safe and have a great night. Topping Talks.